Hey guys! Tonight we tiptoe barefoot through a patch of Nile mud that smells vaguely like wet onions and dreams. Papyrus rustles overhead, cicadas hum like ancient radiators, and somewhere behind you, a crocodile yawns in slow motion. Welcome to a world where roses don't just bloom, they whisper, plot, and occasionally get someone cursed. You're standing at the edge of a walled garden near a temple complex, where a young servant kneels by a clay basin. He's plucking the soft pink petals from a flower with exaggerated care, letting each one float into a shallow dish of river water. Steam rises faintly. The air smells like yesterday's rain and the faintest suggestion of perfume floral. Yes, but with something earthy beneath. Not quite rot, not quite spice. Just ancient. This is not a bouquet for the queen. It's a sacred bathwater blend, meant for an idol so heavily anointed in oils. He glistens like a roast goose in the torchlight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments, because I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge softly past the temple wall, barefoot through the warm dust. A scent clings to your ankles, damp petals and lemon balm. A guard eyes you, half asleep, his beard crusted with pollen. He doesn't stop you. Maybe he assumes you're a servant. Maybe he's just tired. Either way, you're in. The first thing you learn: ancient Egypt didn't invent roses, but it absolutely tried to perfect them. The wild rose species, Rosa gallica, most likely snuck into Egypt via traders and root smugglers sometime around the Middle Kingdom, possibly earlier. But it wasn't until the New Kingdom, around 1500 BCE, that they became the obsession of every scribe, priest, and sweaty gardener from Memphis to Thebes. The Egyptians had already mastered lotus cultivation, the blue ones for purity, the white ones for funerals, and the pink ones for parties. But roses were different. Roses had drama. The petals bruised easily. The stems harbored tiny, invisible thorns that left you itching in the bath. And they demanded more attention than a jealous concubine with a poetry hobby. And yet, their scent, when not overpowered by embalming spices, lingered like a half-forgotten love letter. You squat beside the rose basin now. The water is warm. A few petals drift toward your toes. The servant glares at you, but you pretend not to notice. You dip your fingers in. The texture is soft, silky, but sticky. That's from the resin. The priests use myrrh to stabilize the rose water. They say it makes the fragrance last longer. Historians still argue whether that's true or just a placebo invented by someone with a surplus of myrrh and poor marketing ethics. A scribe nearby mutters under his breath as he documents the contents of a ceremonial bouquet. He pauses, dips his reed into a small jar of ink, and casually sneezes onto the papyrus. You try not to laugh. The sneeze smudges the name of a noblewoman. Somewhere, in a parallel dimension of bureaucracy, a tax exemption just evaporated. You move on. To your left, a garden of controlled chaos unfolds. Low brick troughs snake between fruit trees and olive bushes, and nestled within rows of carefully pruned roses, their roots resting in a mixture of silt, sand, and something that might have once been fish, or bread, or both. The gardeners sing, not for joy, mostly to keep the cobras away. A man in linen robes leans over a bush and pinches off a browning leaf. He tuts at it like a disappointed uncle. You watch him mix something into the soil, possibly goose droppings, definitely honey. Apparently, the roses like it. Fun fact: Egyptians believed bees were born from the tears of Ra, so feeding rose bushes honey was practically divine agriculture. Either that, or a sticky waste of perfectly good temple candy. A cat wanders by. You follow it past a crumbling statue of Hathor and into a shaded pergola, where baskets of freshly plucked petals sit in the sun. You take a handful. They're warm, just slightly moist. They smell tired, like they've seen too much incense and not enough rain. Someone once wrote that the purpose of a rose is not beauty but memory. You don't remember who wrote it. Neither do the Egyptians. But as the breeze rolls in and the smell of crushed petals wafts upward, you think, maybe it was the roses themselves who whispered it first. The sun begins to dip. Shadows stretch long and thin across the garden walls. You sink to the ground beside a clay jug, and close your eyes for a moment. The hum of bees fades. The laughter of gardeners melts into silence. Somewhere beyond the wall, the Nile laps against a stone bank. You can almost hear the water sighing. And tomorrow, someone will be back at this very basin, plucking petals one by one. Not for war, not for power, but for a god who never quite asked for them and a flower that never stopped blooming. The next morning finds you exactly where you left off. Only now the light is softer, and the air tastes like damp linen and half-dried limes. Someone is burning frankincense nearby, and for a moment you think you're still dreaming. You're not. A procession is forming near the banks of the Nile. You squint. A thin line of priests in linen robes are walking in near-perfect synchrony, each holding a woven reed basket brimming with garlands. Not just lotus blossoms, this time there are roses, pink ones, and some that have been dyed a strange bluish tint, likely with fermented pomegranate rind and papyrus ink. You blink slowly, still unsure whether they're for a festival or a funeral. Possibly both. This is Egypt. After all, they call it the Pare season. Now the emergence when the Nile retreats after its annual flooding and the land begins to breathe again. And as a gesture of gratitude to Hapi, the Nile god, temple priests make their floral offerings. You find yourself standing on a low mud brick platform with a few early spectators. A sandaled merchant eating dates, 2 goats, and a 6-year-old boy with a basket of rose stems who looks extremely suspicious of you. You don't blame him. One by one, the garlands are placed on small reed floats and released into the slow-moving current. Some drift gently, some spin. One floats upstream for no reason. Anyone can explain. That one causes 2 priests to whisper frantically and adjust their tunics in fear. Historians still argue whether these rose float rituals were more symbolic or functional. Did the priests believe Hapi needed floral bribes to avoid a bad harvest? Or were the petals simply decoration for a god who already made up his mind? Either way, if a garland floated too fast, it meant the floodwaters would be excessive, too slow, and famine. And if it didn't float at all, well, someone might quietly disappear from the temple registry. A nearby priest adjusts a ceremonial wig that clearly doesn't belong to him. It's too large and smells vaguely of goat butter. You try not to stare. He gives a nervous smile and pushes the final float into the river, holding his breath as it wobbles, tips, and then rights itself. The crowd lets out a quiet, relieved murmur. Meanwhile, you wander back from the river and discover a side path one rarely used. Judging by the overgrown vines and single sandal abandoned halfway down the trail, at the end of it, a small altar surrounded by thorny rose bushes. The petals here are darker, blood red, almost black at the edges, not ceremonial, wild. This is no garden for tourists or priestly rituals. It's a votive grove dedicated to a more ancient deity, likely predating Osiris, a fertility spirit. Maybe a river nymph, maybe just a very fragrant ghost. The roses here aren't trimmed. They've grown tangled around the statues and slabs of sun-bleached stone. You see old offerings crumbling in the dirt, bits of bread, wilted leeks, a necklace of faience beads. One rose still holds a tiny scarab, half buried in its petals. No one sung to these roses today, but still they bloom. You kneel to get a closer look. The scent is intense, earthier than the temple varieties, less refined, more honest. There's something unbothered about them. They're not here to impress anyone. They don't care if they're worshipped or ignored. And just as you're inhaling a little too deeply, a bee decides to land squarely on your nose. You panic. Of course, because despite your interest in ancient culture, you are very much still afraid of tiny winged needles. You flail backward, trip over a root, and land face first into a patch of thorny devotion. The boy with the basket of rose stems reappears at the path's entrance. He's not helping. He's laughing. You decide to consider this a spiritual initiation. After untangling yourself, you return to the public courtyard, where the procession has ended and temple staff are now gathering the remaining unused roses. Some are too faded to reuse. Others are carefully dried and added to little leather pouches for scent preservation. One young servant holds a cracked ceramic jar filled with what looks like muddy water. You ask what it is. He shrugs and answers, "Yesterday's offerings." He pours it over a rose bush in the corner with a reverent nod. Apparently, divine bathwater makes excellent fertilizer. The sun creeps higher. You watch as a cart piled high with rose clippings trundles off toward the perfumer's quarter. But not all of it will become perfume. Some of it will be pressed for oil, some boiled into dyes, some burned, and some only a select few will be chosen for the next sacred garland float. Petals that make the cut are hand-sorted by scent, softness, and color. A flawed petal is considered unworthy of divine company. Much like your social standing after that bee incident, you think back to that one float that drifted upriver. That can't be good, right? But then again, maybe it was just a strong breeze, or maybe the river knows something you don't. You find yourself crouching near a rosebed on the temple outskirts, nose full of dust, hands sticky from a fig you didn't ask to hold, and eyes locked on something decidedly questionable. A gardener with a sun-scorched back is squatting over a bucket. In it, crocodile dung. Next to it, beer mash from the temple kitchen. And next to that, crushed dates, fish scales, and something that may once have been a sandal. He's stirring it with the stick like it's his grandmother's stew recipe. You take a deep breath and immediately regret it. Welcome to the not-so-glamorous side of rose cultivation in ancient Egypt. The gardener, unaware of your horror, cheerfully explains in between bites of roasted barley that this is what roses need: fertility. He insists is a cosmic dance. And what better way to appease the gods than through a mixture of sacred refuse? You nod politely, then immediately take one giant step back. Historians still argue whether this exact mixture was common across Egypt or unique to certain temples. What's agreed upon is that Egyptians were enthusiastic recyclers. Nothing organic was truly wasted. Every grain of goose fat, smear of honey, or unchewed date skin was bound for some form of reuse, often in agriculture. Sometimes in unexpected places, like this rosebed. You walk along the rows where the soil squelches slightly underfoot. Thanks to the recent irrigation, not water, though Nile silt, funneled through narrow channels and filtered allegedly by reeds, it smells like warm bread left in the rain. Each bush is planted into a raised bed made of sun-baked mud bricks. The roses are tied with fraying linen strips to crooked sticks, each labeled with crude hieroglyphs, names, dates, and occasional doodles of cats. One bush seems to have a miniature spear stuck in it, possibly an offering, possibly an aggressive pruning strategy. A young apprentice follows behind you with a large jar. Worm tea, he says with pride. You ask him what that is. He points to the bottom of the jar, where, sure enough, several large worms are floating peacefully in a brownish-greenish mixture. You decide not to ask any more questions for the rest of the day. Still, there's method in the madness. Roses, delicate as they are, thrive in rich, moist soil but not too wet. And Nile side plots were ideal for that tricky balance. Every morning, a team of servants wakes before the sun to redirect water through shallow ditches. A scribe tracks the flow on a wax tablet. The job is so boring. His eyelids flicker more than a stylus. Then comes the mulching. You watch as a man with the largest straw hat you've ever seen gently packs damp thatch and donkey hair around the base of each rosebush. He hums as he works. Occasionally, he pauses to sprinkle bits of what looks like crushed eggshell. You blink. Is that perfume? Indeed. A priest walks past sprinkling a powdered rose mixture onto the bushes themselves. It smells shockingly nice, which seems odd. Why perfume the roses before they bloom? Apparently, it's a protective offering. Roses were considered semi-divine, especially those grown for temple use. To scent the plants was to honor them, like tucking a lullaby into the soil. Nearby, two workers are arguing over compost ratios. One insists on a higher quantity of fig peel, the other swears by fish bones and date pits. A third chimes in that his grandmother swore by soaking donkey dung in beer before adding it to the roots. You try not to laugh, but honestly, that last one might be onto something. Fermented offerings were thought to awaken the soil, or the gods, or both. You lean close to a particularly healthy-looking bush. Its petals are a deep blush pink, the color of terracotta at sunset. The scent is stronger than the others, slightly spicy, with a hint of citrus and salt. You imagine some future embalmer squeezing the essence from this flower to dab on the linen-wrapped wrists of a noblewoman. She'll lie in a gilded tomb, smelling like this one last whisper of summer. A scarab beetle lands on the leaf. You flinch. It stays perfectly still watching you. Is it judging you? Probably. A low, rhythmic chant begins from somewhere deeper in the garden. You follow it to a corner enclosure, hidden by woven palm screens. Inside, a team of priestesses tends to a small batch of ceremonial roses grown only under moonlight. They're translucent, almost silver. You gasp. They hush you. These, they say, are not for perfume, not for offerings. These are for dreams. What does that mean? They don't explain. One gestures to a pot of night water rain collected during a lunar eclipse. Mixed with powdered lapis and rose dust, she dips her fingers into it and anoints the petals. Another priestess whispers, "For the goddesses only." You're not sure if she means Hathor, or Isis, or something older. But the air shifts. For a brief moment, the garden smells like memory. Something you've forgotten but know you once loved. You close your eyes. Somewhere in the temple, a bell rings. Time to go. But the scent clings to your clothes as you walk away. You'll carry it with you. Through all 15 sections, even if it was just fermented donkey beer and worm tea. You wake to the sound of sandals slapping earth and the low grumble of someone trying to coax a goat out of a flower bed. Somewhere nearby, a gardener mutters something ancient and unprintable as the goat triumphantly flattens a row of rosebuds. You, however, are headed to Thebes, not the one in Greece, the real one. The Egyptian Thebes, with its soaring pylons, sacred lakes, and an entire workforce dedicated to making sure flowers bloom on cue for the gods. The pharaoh, and anyone important enough to carry a golden umbrella. You follow a cart rickety, overburdened, and definitely not regulation weight as it wobbles down a dust path toward the temple gardens. The driver is half asleep, flicking petals off his shoulders. Behind him, the cart carries tightly bound bundles of rose stems wrapped in linen, labeled with charcoal symbols. Some go to funerary rituals, others are bound for royal perfume houses, and a few are smuggled. You didn't hear it from me. Historians still argue whether these side deals were organized crime or just enterprising gardeners trying to earn a little extra bread. Either way, Thebes had a bustling, slightly shady rose trade, complete with off-record cuttings and whispered garden codes. As you enter the sacred garden courtyard, you're hit with a wall of scent, part flower shop, part incense factory, and maybe a dash of wet frog. The gardener crews here are lean, sun-dark, and intensely focused. Their tools, not bronze or copper too expensive, just sharpened sticks, woven reed ropes, and bone-handled knives passed down from generations who'd probably yell if they saw you standing on the compost mound. You step aside. One crew is gently pruning the sacred rose bushes that grow closest to the inner sanctuary. These flowers are treated better than most people. They're watered by hand using specially filtered Nile water. They're sung to at sunrise. They're shaded during high heat with papyrus umbrellas shaped like lotus leaves. And at night, they're tucked in literally under linen sheets to protect their petals from the desert breeze. The head gardener, an older man named something that translates roughly to Petal Savior of the South, carries a reed notebook filled with meticulous drawings of each rose bush. He tracks their height, color variation, and scent profile. Today, he frowns at one that's leaning too far left. With a grunt, he stakes it upright and scolds it in a whisper. You wonder if it's working. Nearby, two younger gardeners are playing a game with clipped rose stems. The rules are unclear, but someone wins when the stem lands point down in the dirt and stays upright. The loser has to refill all the water jugs for the day, which sounds fair until you see the size of the cistern. As the day heats up, the rhythm of the work changes. Morning tasks are about trimming, scent sampling, and composting. Midday shifts toward tying garlands, soaking stems, and chasing off invasive ducks. One boy walks by carrying a basket of petals. They're not headed for an altar. They're going to the oil press. You follow him through a narrow corridor into the workshop. Inside, rows of low clay vats filled with rose petals steeping in warmed sesame oil. The air is dense, heavy, like being hugged by a bouquet inside a clay oven. A woman stirs the petals with a long stick. Don't breathe too fast, she says, or you'll smell this for a week. You try anyway. Regret follows swiftly. The process is simple in theory. Petals are soaked, stirred, strained. More petals are added. The oil grows stronger. After a week, it's ready. But each batch smells a little different. The roses from Thebes are sharper, more citrusy than the ones near Memphis, which smell faintly of almonds and regret. Each jar of rose oil is stamped with the temple seal. Most go to the priests, a few to nobles, and some vanish in transit. You walk out blinking, lungs full of fragrance, stomach rumbling. You've inhaled half your body weight in floral vapor. It's time to eat. You join a group of workers huddled under a fig tree for lunch. They share bread, olives, and a boiled egg that has clearly seen better days. Someone offers you a small bundle of rose petals rolled in honey and sesame. You accept. It tastes like perfume trying to be a snack. Someone else jokes that the pharaoh probably has roses for breakfast. Another says his uncle once stole a royal rose and planted it behind his house only to find his goat refused to eat it, and his wife left him. Coincidence? Maybe, or maybe that rose remembered who it belonged to. After lunch, the team returns to work. One group braids rose stems into necklaces. Another prepares petals for drying. The sun creeps lower, the wind picks up, and in the distance, someone begins to sing. It's not for you. It's for the flowers. They bloom longer when you sing. The workers insist, or maybe it just makes the day pass faster. Either way, the sound floats over to the garden like pollen drifting, fading. Sweet, you close your eyes, breathing it in. Even the goat seems calm now. You duck under a carved lintel just as a servant carrying a tray of rose oil stumbles past you, the scent trailing like a silk ribbon through the air. His eyes are wide, his pace urgent. You hear him mutter, "Don't spill it." Not again. You don't ask. Some things are better left unspilled. You've wandered into the royal quarter now, or rather, the edge of it. The part where commoners and workers aren't technically allowed, but rules tend to get blurry when you look like you belong and walk with confidence. You do neither, but somehow, you're still here. Ahead of you, a row of clay amphorae glisten in the morning light. Inside each is rose oil triple filtered, sun-aged, and sealed with beeswax. These aren't the muddy brews from the temple back rooms. These are for the palace, and they smell expensive. The royal rose oil wasn't just perfume. It was status, identity, ritual, power. Pharaohs wore it like armor, layered on their necks, wrists, and even on the hems of their tunics. The scent had to announce them before their voice did. One pharaoh, legend says, refused to meet foreign emissaries unless they first bathed in his personal blend of rose, myrrh, and crushed acacia pod. Another ordered that every servant who passed within 6 cubits of his throne must carry rose oil in a hidden pouch, just in case he needed a refresh. You pass a palace chamber now, the door half open. Inside, a woman leans over a bronze mirror, adjusting her wig with surgical precision. Her maid dabs rose oil at her temples. The scent wafts out like a gentle punch to the face, sweet, musky, a little bit smug. Historians still argue whether the overuse of perfume in the later dynasties was a response to declining political power, or just a collective decision that if you were going to lose an empire, you might as well smell fabulous doing it. But the obsession ran deeper. Inside the perfumer's annex, jars of dried petals are ground into powder and packed into linen sachets. Some are tucked into bedding, others into sandals. Even royal cats wore rose collars. Yes, cats. You imagine one slinking past a marble column, tail flicking, smelling better than you do on your best day. One wall is dedicated to mortuary use. An embalmer with gold-inked tattoos carefully drips rose oil onto mummy wrappings. The body before him is long gone, skin like driftwood, hands curled like dried leaves, but the scent, still potent, as if the roses are trying to coax the soul back into the flesh. You crouch beside a low tray filled with tiny jars. The labels are faded, but you can just make out the symbols for divine blessing and oddly seduction. Apparently, even the gods. What? A bit of flair. But there's more. Rose oil was used to mark sacred boundaries, doors to shrines, mouths of tombs, the edge of a ritual circle drawn in crushed ochre and dreams. You imagine someone dipping a reed brush into a petal and oil mixture, whispering a prayer as they trace a spiral onto the temple floor. It wasn't just for the nose. It was for the spirit. A signal, a veil, a spell. Back outside, you find yourself beside a high wall lined with creeping vines and rose bushes so thick they almost hum. Bees drift lazily among the blossoms. You recognize the scent. This is the royal garden. Only a select few are allowed here, which means, of course, you're going in. The air is cooler under the pergola. Stone benches curve around rose beds, each bush pruned into perfection. Some are trained into spirals. Others bloom in layered tiers like a dancer's skirt. A fountain burbles nearby, the water perfumed faintly with petals floating on the surface. You sit. A gardener approaches, carrying a clay pot. He eyes you, then shrugs and begins watering the roses. You nod. He nods. An ancient understanding passes between you. We are both pretending we belong here. That's enough. He tells you that one of these bushes was planted by the queen herself. She chose the seeds, touched the soil, named the bush. Though no one remembers what she called it. The name was lost. Or maybe, he says, the rose took it and never gave it back. There's a rumor that the queen once bathed in rose oil so concentrated it could have paid for a year's worth of wheat. She did it only once, and then declared, "No scent should compete with my thoughts," which is a very royal thing to say when your bath could feed a village. You wander deeper into the garden. A stone plinth bears a faded carving, a hand holding a rose, no name, just the symbol. You sit beside it, a petal falls onto your lap. It is soft, bruised at the edge, fragrant still. A breeze carries the scent across your face. For a moment, everything is still, even the bees stop buzzing. You inhale, and the world smells divine. You shuffle out of the royal rose garden with a dazed expression, hair full of pollen, smelling like a noble woman's purse after a perfume spill. No regrets, but also no clear idea of where you are now. Turns out, you've wandered into the artisan's quarter, an area thick with mortar dust, camel prints, and arguments about whose fault it was that the column cracked. But then you catch it just beyond the sharp tang of wet clay and boiled linen. That scent again. Rose. Faint, but fighting to be noticed. You follow it. It leads you through a maze of mud brick corridors and into a shaded courtyard where three women are bent over small clay burners, grinding something with pestles and muttering in the ancient art of controlled panic. A single drop of something amber-colored slips into a wide bowl. A puff of steam rises. One woman shrieks. You, of course, are delighted. Welcome to the perfumer's compound. The woman nearest you glares as if to say, "This is delicate work. Breathe wrong and you ruin it." So naturally, you hold your breath. They're making something rare today. A concentrated rose perfume for the royal family. But not just any blend. This one is special. This one has a name. You inch closer and spot a cracked label written in hasty hieratic, "The Nose of Nefertiti." Someone's trying to recreate the exact scent worn by the queen herself during festivals, formal dinners, and, supposedly, while inspecting her favorite chariot. Historians still argue whether this signature scent was a real formula or just ancient branding. But whatever the truth, the story has lingered for centuries. The ingredients are obscure. Rose oil, yes, but blended with the cedar resin, pounded almonds, bruised mandrake, and something the lead perfumer calls desert wind, which might just be sand. The women chant quietly as they mix. You're told it's to calm the perfume. You're pretty sure it's to calm them because this process has gone wrong before. One time, they added too much mandrake root and accidentally created a perfume so spicy, the high priest sneezed during a blessing and dropped a golden goblet. It cracked. So did temple protocol. You peer into one of the jars. The liquid is a shimmering amber with a bloom of oil on top. A single petal floats inside, spinning slowly, like it's performing a tiny ritual of its own. The woman closest to you finally speaks. "This perfume is not for smelling," she says. "It's for remembering." She lets you sniff the edge of the jar anyway. Your eyebrows immediately attempt to leap off your face. It's overwhelming. Spiced floral, thick and heady. There's a sweetness, but behind it something darker, like old wood, like dusk, like regret. You cough. She nods approvingly. "Then it's finished," she says. The jars are sealed and stamped. You're handed a small linen pouch filled with the leftover scrap petals and a wink. For sleep, she says, or dreams, or bad decisions. You nod solemnly and shuffle outside, nose still tingling. A group of children runs past, laughing, each carrying flower garlands. They dart around a delivery cart filled with perfume vessels, bound for the temple. You follow one, just to see where the trail leads. It leads, of course, to a noble woman's bathing chamber. You don't go inside, but you peek through the slatted screen and glimpse a pool tiled with lapis and gold, surrounded by trays of rose petals. A servant gently pours warm water over a mound of floating blossoms. And there on a nearby stool sits a small bottle labeled Nefertiti. You wonder if it's the real one. You wonder if she ever wondered how it made her smell, or if she simply assumed the roses would obey. You drift away, deeper into the alleys behind the perfume house. There's an old man hunched over a brazier, boiling petals in copper pots. He adds something green, then something blue. He mumbles about getting the color right this time. You ask what he's doing. Rose cologne. He replies, 4 sandals. You blink. Yes, apparently, scented sandal straps are all the rage now, mostly among young nobles trying to impress one another during temple festivals. One even claims his sandals smell like ambition. You try not to laugh. He offers you a sample. You take it. Dab it on your wrist. It smells like rose petals soaked in ambition and shoe leather. Not your thing. Still, you nod and thank him. The path winds back toward the Nile now, where laundry workers are rinsing robes in river water tinged pink with petal runoff. The wind carries hints of all you've passed: perfume and sweat, incense and clay, memory and money. You wonder, for a moment, if anyone truly remembers what a rose smelled like before all this, before it was mixed and bottled and boiled and judged. Maybe it was simpler. Maybe it just bloomed. And that was enough. You wake before dawn not because you want to, but because someone nearby is shouting about stolen roots and waving what appears to be a slightly wilted rose stem like a weapon. You rub your eyes, roll over on your reed mat, and listen. Apparently, sometime during the night, one of the prized ceremonial rose bushes from the Karnak temple garden was raided. Not all of it, just the roots, just enough to grow more elsewhere. You sit up, smuggling rose cuttings. That's bold and surprisingly common. You follow the noise into the garden courtyard where a cluster of scribes and guards are examining the dirt like it's a murder scene. One points at a trail of crushed petals. Another notes the absence of thorn marks on the nearby path, which somehow is suspicious. Turns out, the rosebush in question had been watched, guarded, even catalogued in a scroll that describes it as sweet of scent, noble of lineage, and worthy of divine nostrils. You stifle a laugh. Divine nostrils. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian elite believed certain rose varieties carried sacred bloodlines, or if that's just ancient garden gossip that got out of hand. Either way, stealing a royal rose root isn't just theft, it's treason. Unless, of course, you're someone important. Which brings us to the accused. A nobleman, silk tunic, too clean to have done any actual digging, but his gardener, missing. The head scribe, who looks like he hasn't blinked in 3 hours, reads from a clay tablet. Suspicion arises due to prior infractions, namely unlicensed perfume production and failure to return ceremonial compost buckets. The nobleman scoffs. You wander over to the spot where the rose was. There's still a faint scent, something bruised, angry. A few torn leaves lie like evidence across the walkway. Then you spotted a tiny piece of linen snagged on a nearby brick. You pocket it. A guard notices, but you give the universal, "I'm just a curious idiot. Look," and he shrugs. You leave the courtyard and follow a back path toward the perfumer's district again. Only this time, your eyes are sharper. You notice the quiet exchange of a wrapped bundle near a spice stall. The way the merchant doesn't meet your gaze. The way the bundle smells just faintly of damp earth and petals. You're not the only one who notices. Behind a tapestry stall, a girl no older than 10 is sketching something on a broken bit of pottery. You peek. It's a crude map with rose symbols. One near the temple, another by the river, a third, oddly, behind the scribe school. She glances up, winks, and covers the shard with a scrap of bread. You say nothing, By midday, rumors are blooming faster than actual roses. Some say the nobleman plans to start his own secret rose grove and undercut the temple markets. Others claim he's trying to breed a black rose that blooms only during eclipses. One particularly dramatic gardener whispers that the stolen root will be planted on a lover's grave and bloom forever out of guilt. You return to the garden in time to see a new rose bush being planted in the empty bed. It's not the same, of course. Different color, weaker scent, but they pack the soil with care and pour ceremonial water over the roots. A priestess murmurs a blessing. You can't hear all of it, but one line sticks. Let the bloom remember what was taken. A poet walks by and jots it down for a future scroll, probably for a festival. Later that evening, you attend a private gathering. Quiet, discreet, and highly illegal, a backroom of a perfumer's workshop. Low lamplight, several small jars on a tray, each with a different rose oil blend. One is rumored to contain extract from the stolen bush. You sniff. It's sharp, wild, unruly. You're not sure if it's the real thing or just a story in a bottle. But isn't that what roses are? Memory disguised as scent, desire with thorns. You step out into the night. The moon is low, a breeze stirs the trees, and somewhere, in a garden that doesn't exist on any official scroll, a stolen rose root is taking hold. You're jolted awake by a scream, not a loud one. A tight, muffled sort of sound, like someone just realized a very specific flower has just done something terribly, terribly wrong. You rise from your mat again, dust off your knees again, and stumble toward the temple where the daily floral offerings are underway. This morning's centerpiece, a hand-woven bouquet of white lotus, blue flax, and the freshest of the sacred pink roses placed reverently before the statue of Hathor, goddess of joy, music, motherhood, and yes, beauty. Everything is calm until a priest leans in to adjust the petals and freezes. You squint. Something's off. The rose at the center, full, vibrant, perfect just an hour ago is wilting, not gently, not politely, but dramatically, collapsing like a scandal at court. Gasps ripple through the sanctuary. A second priest approaches. He touches the flower, blinks, steps back like it bit him. You inch forward, and yep, that rose is absolutely folding in on itself like a guilty conscience. Historians still argue whether floral offerings were meant to be symbolic or if the Egyptians truly believed the gods could reject a rose outright. But judging by the way that priest is now sweating through his ceremonial collar, you'd guess he's leaning toward the literal interpretation. The head priest arrives. He examines the flower, says nothing. Then he turns slowly, dramatically, and mutters, "Who selected this bloom?" Dead silence. Eventually, a trembling apprentice steps forward. He's young, too young. His tunic is slightly damp, and his left sandal is missing. "It was perfect this morning," he croaks. A lie. Maybe, or maybe not. Sometimes, roses have their own opinions. You watch the high priest pluck the offending flower from the bouquet. He turns it in his fingers, inspecting the stem, the bruise along one petal, the faint brown line creeping in like a secret. Then, with no ceremony at all, he tosses it into the temple basin. The splash echoes. He turns back to the apprentice and says, "Next time, pick one that wants to be here." You're not sure if that's floristry advice or spiritual doctrine. Either way, you slowly back out of the sanctuary before your face reveals just how badly you want to laugh. Outside, the other temple workers are buzzing. Everyone's whispering about the wilt. Superstitions reawaken like they never went to sleep. One man insists it's a sign of plague. Another swears it means the god is displeased with someone in the royal family. Probably that cousin who borrowed the ceremonial mirror and never returned it. Someone else mutters, "This happened before." You know, you perk up. She tells you the tale in a low voice. Years ago, during an equinox ceremony, a similar rose wilted mid-offering. That apprentice was sent north, which sounds harmless until you realize it means banishment to the crocodile marshes, for a flower. And now it's happened again. You follow the gossip trail to the temple gardens, where the flower beds are now being double-checked by paranoid attendants. They're sniffing stems, poking soil, whispering apologies to petals. One is even offering his lunch to a particularly moody rosebush. You sidle up beside him. Do they always react this strongly? You ask. He shrugs. Wouldn't you, if your whole job depended on a plant being in a good mood? Fair point. Later that afternoon, the apprentice returns to the scene of his disgrace. Dragging a watering jug nearly his size, he pauses by a row of pale pink roses, lifts the jug, and murmurs something under his breath. You lean in. He's apologizing. To the roses, you don't interrupt. And to your surprise, the petals seem perkier. You wander off, suddenly aware of how many eyes are watching you, not human ones. Green, tight-lipped buds, each silently judging your vibes. It's said. You recall that some Egyptian priests believed roses could sense intention, that their scent changed depending on who picked them, that they remembered bruises, insults, neglect. Makes you wonder if today's little temple disaster wasn't horticultural, but personal. As the sun sets, another offering is prepared, a new rose perfect. Quiet, serene is chosen with great ceremony. It's placed on the altar. Everyone holds their breath. The flower doesn't move. Success. Relief washes over the sanctuary like perfume. The apprentice exhales. The priest nods. Somewhere, a scribe updates the record. Second rose. Accepted. But as you leave, you glance back, and for just one moment, you swear you see the discarded, wilted rose still floating in the basin. Turn slowly in the water, as if it heard everything. You wake up under a sycamore tree with a rose petal stuck to your cheek, and the sound of giggling somewhere behind you. It's high-pitched, mischievous, and suspiciously rhythmic. You sit up and squint into the courtyard beyond the garden wall. There, scattered across woven mats and half-empty wine jugs, are the women of the royal harem, and they're absolutely covered in rose petals. Not in a seductive, artistic way, no more like a floral prank gone rogue. One girl has them tucked into her braids. Another is sticking them between her toes and declaring herself the goddess of soft footfalls. A third is plucking the thorns off a stem and pretending it's a love wand. You've wandered into the courtyard where no official records are kept, but where half the perfume recipes in Thebes probably originated. These are the harem gardens. And the roses here are less sacred and more scandalous. You watch from behind a low wall as the women whisper, laugh, and pass around slips of folded papyrus. Love letters. You assume one young woman reads hers aloud. Dramatically. You smell like myrrh and mystery. Meet me by the granary. She rolls her eyes and tosses the note into the koi pond. Too obvious, she declares. Historians still argue whether these rose-filled courtyards were mere places of leisure or covert centers of court influence. Some say the women here used flowers as currency petals, traded for secrets, stems left as signals, perfume recipes swapped like spells. You slip inside the garden proper, pretending to be very interested in a potted rosebush shaped like a lion. No one stops you. In fact, one of the girls waves you over. You smell like temple oil. She says, sit. You sit. Another hands you a bundle of petals soaked in rosewater and pomegranate juice. She presses it to your wrist and mutters, that's for confidence. Then giggles. You smile, unsure whether you're being blessed or teased. Probably both. In the center of the courtyard is a low table covered in perfume bowls, dried petals, and half-finished poems. One scroll reads, your voice is like sandalwood in suffering. You choke down a laugh. A girl with hennaed fingers leans in. Want to see the secret garden? You nod before you think it through. She leads you through an archway draped in linen strips that tickle your face as you pass. Inside, a smaller garden, shrouded in shade. The roses here are not ordinary. These are deep red, some streaked with yellow, others blooming so densely they look like silk cushions. They grow better here, she whispers. Away from the priests, she points to a small stone platform. It holds an offering bowl not to a god, but to a name scratched in the stone, Menet. No titles, no job, just a name. She was one of us, the girl says. They say she grew the first night rose. You ask what that means. The girl shrugs, one that only blooms when it hears music. Of course, a few steps away, two women are braiding rose stems into bracelets for our wrists. One says, when the prince visits, he never notices our eyes, but he does notice roses. You start to realize the petals here serve more than one purpose. their perfume and poetry, lure and armor. There's power in smelling like something delicate when you are anything but. As the sun shifts, the women gather their scrolls, giggling over poorly written verses and misdelivered bouquets. One girl drops a petal trail as she walks like she's marking territory, or leaving a secret message only the right person will understand. You slip back into the outer garden, where the sycamore casts new shadows. In your palm, a single petal from the night rose. It smells faintly of sandalwood, laughter, and something else, something like knowing more than you're letting on. You pocket it. As you walk away, a voice calls after you. Tell no one what you saw. You turn. They're all laughing, but one girl isn't. She holds your gaze, presses a finger to her lips, and vanishes behind the curtain of linen. The scent lingers. Somewhere, a love letter is being burned, and a new rose is blooming. You're beginning to think you've met every kind of rose lover Egypt has to offer: gardeners, priests, perfumers, flirty harem girls, and one suspiciously elegant cat. But today's path takes a different turn. It begins at a funeral. The procession moves slowly along the Nile bank. A boat, painted black and gold, glides through reeds. On it lies a high official, his hands folded neatly across his chest, a golden amulet at his throat, and most striking of all, a halo of rose petals scattered across his linen-wrapped torso. You've seen a lot of flower use by now, but this is different. This is deliberate, final, a message for the gods. You follow the procession, keeping to the shade. The mourners chant softly, their robes brushing the dust. Occasionally, a woman lets a petal fall from her fingers, like a breadcrumb for the soul to find its way home. Historians still argue whether the roses in Egyptian funerals were symbolic of rebirth, protection, or simply expensive proof that someone loved you enough to spend half their rose oil allowance on your corpse. Possibly all three. At the embalming house, you are met with the familiar stink of natron, incense, and slow decay. It's not pleasant, but it's sacred. The embalmers here work quietly. Precisely. You see jars lined up along the wall, one for cedar oil, one for frankincense, and yes, one clearly marked rose essence. You lean closer. Inside, dark pink petals soaked in what smells like tears, honey, and salt. One embalmer dips a soft brush and begins to anoint the chest cavity of the body. The petals are tucked into folds of cloth between the ribs, like secrets meant to rot sweetly. You've never seen anything so tender done with a corpse. They aren't just preserving him, they're dressing him for eternity. Another embalmer walks by with a small pouch dangling from her belt. It's full of crushed rose petals and, oddly, a boiled egg. You raise an eyebrow. For the next life, she explains, in case he gets hungry. Naturally, you continue watching as they seal the wrappings with resin and press a small clay seal into the wax. It bears a rose motif, the same flower that once meant love, beauty, and flirtation is now being used to close the mouth of the dead. Outside, mourners gather under a linen canopy. They're offered bread, beer, and rose water to wash away the dust. One old woman wipes her eyes with a petal. Another presses a single bloom to the chest of her tunic and doesn't let go. You're offered a cup. You sip. It's faintly floral, slightly bitter. It tastes like goodbye. As the day winds down, you find yourself trailing a delivery boy headed back to the embalmer's quarters. He's balancing two baskets, one full of clean linens and one of roses. Turns out, the dead weren't the only ones receiving bouquets. You follow him deeper into the workshop maze and discover something unexpected. A small altar, hidden behind a reed screen. On it, several tiny offerings, a coin, a bead, a smear of honey, and in the center, a perfectly fresh rose. This, the boy says, is for those who don't get processions, unclaimed bodies, servants, the forgotten. The embalmers leave them tokens anyway, sometimes a feather, sometimes a whispered name. And when they have them roses, you kneel by the altar. In the fading light, the petals seem to glow, and suddenly, the scent that's followed you this whole journey doesn't feel indulgent or powerful. It feels kind, not loud, not royal, not seductive, just human. You reach into your satchel and pull out the petal from the harem courtyard. It feels right to leave it here. So you do. The wind shifts. Somewhere in the embalming hall, a woman begins to sing a low, wordless hum that coils through the walls like smoke. You stay until the last note fades, and you swear the rose on the altar lifts ever so slightly, as if to say, "We're still here." You find yourself walking slowly now, half dazed, as if your lungs are lined with petals. There's too much scent clinging to you. Rose oil, embalming balm, and a haunting trace of honeyed linen. And your mind floats somewhere between curiosity and calm. You're headed toward the scribal quarter, where words outlast bodies and rose petals sometimes get pressed between pages instead of chests. You step into a cool chamber where the walls are stacked with scrolls, and the floor smells like mildew, ink, and dried reeds. A scribe is hunched over a scroll, squinting at a diagram of something that looks vaguely botanical. He doesn't look up. "Rose recipes," he mutters. 4 different ones, possibly 5, but the 5th is cursed. So, you lean over his shoulder. He's copying from a much older scroll, flaking at the edges, almost too fragile to touch. The script is clean, but odd. Ingredients listed, instructions outlined, but each recipe includes a final line like, "Whisper once, stir twice," or "Do not make during a red moon." You raise your eyebrows. He sighs. Every perfumer thinks they're a poet. You glance at the scroll's title, "Concoctions for Fragrance and Flesh." Below that, someone has scribbled in red ink, "Not all are for noses." A chill runs across your arms. In the next room, another scribe is boiling something in a shallow bronze dish. The room fills with vapor. "Soft boil," he says casually, "to extract the inner perfume." You peer in. Petals swirl in cloudy liquid, tinged faintly pink. He lifts a reed ladle and pours it into a series of tiny clay molds, solid perfume tablets. He explains, "For travelers, priests, and anyone who wants to smell like their favorite regrets." You pocket one when he's not looking. On a high shelf nearby, you find a battered scroll titled "Rose for Wound and Whisper." It's a list of medical applications. Rose compresses for burns, petal tinctures for grief, and something called a perfumed goat wrap for hip pain. You skip that one. Historians still argue whether these rose remedies were practical medicine or just comforting rituals wrapped in good smells. But one thing's clear. The Egyptians believed scent could shift the soul toward healing, memory, or even transformation. You drift into a quieter corner where an older woman is translating fragments of an even older papyrus. She glances up. "Want to hear something strange?" she asks. "Always." She points to a barely legible line. "If roses are kept too long among the dead, they forget their bloom." You ask what it means. She shrugs. "Some say it's metaphor. Others say that rose oil, stored too long in tombs, turned bitter. But I think it's something else. A warning." "Maybe." You sit. She tells you of a legend, a rose that once bloomed only when placed in the hands of someone who had told no lies. The problem, no one could make it open. Eventually, it was buried. Some say it still waits, petals folded tight, in a forgotten tomb beneath the old step pyramid. You wonder what it would smell like. "Honesty," she says, as if hearing your thought. "Probably like honesty." Outside, a courier runs past, waving a scroll. You hear the words, "Festival in 2 days, prepare garlands." The scribes groan, because this means another rush of perfume orders, name charms, flower poetry, and of course, rose catalogs. One scroll you pass is entirely dedicated to describing petal colors. Another ranks roses by how long they make a person's breath smell sweet. You find a list titled "Preferred Rose Applications by Deity." Apparently, Hathor likes rose oil mixed with myrrh. Bastet prefers petals soaked in milk. Osiris requires no less than 33 petals per offering, or someone gets gently haunted. You chuckle. On your way out, a younger scribe stops you. "Want to see something?" he whispers. "Always." He leads you to a dusty drawer and pulls out a slip of faded linen. Inside, a single dried rose petal, small, curled, darkened. "This," he says, "was found inside the binding of a soldier's letter. Never opened. Sealed with wax and scent." You ask why. "No one knows," he replies. "Maybe it was too painful. Maybe It was enough just to carry the smell of her. You nod, because you understand. Some messages don't need reading. They just need to be kept. By the time you reach the city edge, your sandals are full of dust, your satchel of scroll fragments and rogue petals, and your mind full of unanswered questions. Good. That means you're ready for the strange part. A girl selling lotus tea points you toward a field where a festival is being prepared. Not the usual kind with official banners and solemn incense lines, but something older, murkier, less sponsored by priests, more whispered among neighbors. You follow the sound of reed flutes and laughter. There's no signage. Of course, this isn't the sort of event that shows up in state records. It's just called the blooming. You arrive just before twilight. A low valley stretches before you, lit by flickering torches planted in rows along garden beds. The scent of roses hangs thick in the air, but something about it feels off, not wrong, just deeper, wilder. Like the difference between a song and a spell, people gather quietly. No official robes, no guards, no idols, just families, lovers, and a few nervous-looking scribes pretending to study. Everyone wears garlands made of different flowers, but almost all include at least one rose. A woman with a basket offers you one. Yours is white, with a single crimson streak down the side, like a brushstroke. She nods at you as if this is important. You accept it. As night falls, the procession begins not in perfect order like a temple ceremony, but in little bursts. Children run ahead, tossing petals into fire pits. Older women chant old songs with words no one fully understands, and in the center of the field stands a simple wooden frame, draped in rose vines. You ask someone nearby what this is for. She replies, "We walk through. And if your scent lingers afterward, you've been chosen." You're about to ask chosen by whom, when a man walks through the arch and a group of children immediately begins sniffing the air like cats at a market stall. They giggle, then nod. Apparently, he passed. You roll your eyes, but admit you're curious. Historians still argue whether the blooming was a folk festival honoring Hathor, Isis, or perhaps a forgotten fertility deity whose worship was never formally recorded. Some say it was a remnant of Nubian influence. Others believe it was simply a community way of celebrating the end of the rose season. And a few fringe voices insist it was a covert mystery cult one that used the scent of roses to separate the awakened from the asleep. Tonight, it just feels like a warm, petal-soaked fever dream. The girl ahead of you walks through the rose arch. Nothing happens. But then a breeze catches her garland, and several petals lift into the air, spinning, dancing, never falling. The crowd gasps. Someone mutters, "She'll marry before the flood." Whatever that means. It's your turn. You hesitate, step through. The roses brush your shoulders. You inhale. Everything smells the same, but slightly off. You catch notes of smoke, wine, salt, something old. As you exit, a boy sniffs dramatically. "Nothing," he declares. The crowd laughs. You bow, "Not chosen." You can live with that. You wander toward the far edge of the field, where an older woman is lighting small clay lamps filled with rose oil. She offers you one. "Place it where your heart tells you," she says. You carry it to a quiet patch by the water's edge and set it down. The flame flickers. The scent rises. You sit beside it and watch as dozens more lights are placed along the path. The entire valley begins to glow like a dreamscape. Rose-scented fireflies against the night. The songs rise again, soft now, less words, more hum. Someone offers you a petal-soaked fig. You accept. It's sweet, overripe, slightly gritty, and oddly perfect. At the center of the field, a circle forms. A group of dancers barefoot, garlanded, begin a slow spiral. They toss petals into the air with each step. You count at least 5 who seem absolutely possessed by joy. One trips over her own ankle and keeps spinning anyway. You lean back on your elbows and let the night swirl. The fire, the roses, the heat, the laughter, the strange, whispered prayers. It's not a ceremony for gods, not tonight. It's for people, for remembering what it's like to bloom. You fall asleep with rose petals in your hair and the firelight fading against your eyelids. When you wake, dawn is just beginning to break, and all the petals are gone. You're awakened by silence, not the absence of sound, but that heavy waiting. Kind of silence that settles before something breaks. The gardens are empty now, still damp from morning dew. A few wilted petals cling to the grass like party confetti after the guests have vanished. You stand, stretch, and notice something strange. The roses. Those ever-present companions of your journey aren't blooming today, not one. You wander temple paths, palace walls, garden terraces. All the buds are closed, tight, stubborn. Some have turned inward entirely, as if sulking. Others hang limply, their stems bent, leaves curling like disappointed sighs. At the edge of a shrine near the river, a gardener kneels in the dirt, scowling. He holds a limp bush in one hand and a fistful of aphid-infested leaves in the other. He looks up and says, "They've stopped listening." You sit beside him. He explains, "Too much water in the last week." The Nile's flooding rhythm, normally dependable, shifted. A delay? A surge? Hard to say. But something in the soil turned, and now the roses are protesting. You nod. Because yes, that tracks. They would protest. You've met them. He points to a row of bushes, all now wrapped in linen strips like injured athletes. "We're trying," he says, "but they're offended." In a nearby corner, another worker tries whispering to a plant. "I sang to it yesterday." She tells you it bloomed a little. Then it spat thorns. Historians still argue whether Egyptian gardeners believed plants had moods, or if that's just a modern romantic interpretation, but you've seen enough by now to know something has shifted. You follow a trail of broken stems to a small pavilion. A priest is pacing in tight circles, clutching a scroll and muttering to himself. He's supposed to deliver a ceremonial bouquet to the governor's feast tonight, and the bouquet is not happening. You peek inside the basket. It contains 2 limp rosebuds, a tired chunk of parsley, and a wilted onion top. Festive. He glares at you. You walk away. Later, in the perfumer's alley, you find a group of apprentices around a boiling vat. The petals aren't absorbing the oil. They're just floating, refusing to break down, refusing to dissolve. You lean in, sniff. It smells like resistance. One boy tries to push them under with a stick. The petals pop back up. Another mutters. They know. You want to laugh. You don't. Instead, you follow a rumor to a field outside the city walls. A last resort rose farm. Wild, unpruned, rumored to have once been sacred, but abandoned after a priest saw a snake eat a flower and called it a sign. The bushes here are monstrous, overgrown, thorny, vibrant in color, but closed tight. You reach for one bud and nearly draw blood. Then you notice them. Frogs. Dozens, hopping through the rose beds, nibbling leaves, knocking over clay stakes, and bees agitated, zigzagging like drunk guards. The soil squelches underfoot. Everything here is too alive, too much. You back away slowly. As you return to town, a familiar voice calls out, "It's the apprentice from the temple garden, the one who once wilted a rose by accident. He's holding a potted bush now, carried with extreme care. One flower has bloomed. Just one." He whispers, "I didn't sing. I just listened." You ask what he means. He shrugs. "I sat next to it all night. Didn't ask anything. Didn't touch it. Didn't beg. And it bloomed." You trail him back to the temple, where the rose is carefully planted in new soil, surrounded by silence. You sit nearby. Wait. A breeze lifts. A second bud begins to open. Maybe the roses aren't broken. Maybe they're just tired of being used, of being symbols, perfumes, offerings, distractions. Maybe today they want to be heard. And if you're lucky, if you're very quiet, they just might open again. You wake to whispers not from people, but from leaves brushing against one another in the breeze, from sand shifting in the cracks between temple stones, and from something barely audible rising from deep beneath the garden soil. It sounds like sighing, or maybe waiting. You're not sure how you got here. Exactly. The path was dusty, the gate half broken. And yet somehow you've arrived at a place where silence blooms thicker than flowers. Cleopatra's private court. You'd heard rumors, whispers of a courtyard locked to all but her inner circle, where no priest presided, no scroll recorded, and no man dared suggest too many roses. Now, you're in it. The air is different here. Dense, sweet. Every petal is at its peak. No wilt, no sting, no thorn daring to touch skin unless invited. These are the roses Cleopatra herself demanded bred. fed, and sung into perfect bloom. You brush past a curtain of vines and enter the heart of it. There she is, not in the flesh, but everywhere. Her scent is in the air, her fingerprints in the garden design. A shallow pool reflects clusters of petals swirling in lazy spirals. Around it, columns carved with vines, not gods. Every detail bends toward beauty, not worship. At the edge of the pool sits a decanter of rose oil so concentrated it glows gold in the sun. This is the site of her infamous bet, the one where, according to legend, Cleopatra wagered with Mark Antony that she could spend a fortune in a single breath. She called for wine, called for petals. Then, when the moment was perfect, she removed one pearl earring, dissolved it in rose-laced vinegar, and drank it. That's the story. Historians still argue whether it actually happened, whether the rose was real, whether the earring was truly worth a city's worth of grain. But the story survived, which, in a way, means she did. You walk the garden perimeter. Each bush here is genetically unique, rumored to be hybrids. Cleopatra bred herself by cross-pollinating stolen Persian varieties with native Nile roses. The result, fragrance sharp enough to silence a room or seduce an empire. You reach for one, it opens for you. Oh, Nia. Inside, the deepest pink you've seen, nearly red. You lean in. It smells like history rewritten in someone's handwriting. Warm, strange, slightly bitter. A servant walks by with a tray of rose-stuffed fig leaves. You're offered one. It tastes like dessert and threat. You watch as dancers rehearse beneath a trellis. They're blindfolded, each holding a single rose between thumb and forefinger. If it droops, they start over. Discipline, the instructor mutters. And scent. No one will remember your steps if you don't leave something behind. You move into the side gallery. Here, old rose garlands hang from bronze hooks, dried but intact, each labeled with a date, a name, a moment. You see one marked, first treaty signed, another, he returned with ships, and one simply labeled, he lied. You don't ask which he. A quiet attendant leads you to a velvet-wrapped alcove. Inside, a stool, a mirror, and an amphora sealed in wax. She breaks the seal. The scent explodes. It's Cleopatra's final blend, stored in this jar, preserved in darkness, protected by curses, rumor, and one particularly aggressive house cat. You step back, nearly dizzy. It smells like the ocean swallowing a poem, like sun-warmed skin after triumph, like a perfume so powerful, no one ever dared copy it, not because they couldn't, but because they wouldn't survive the comparison. The attendant reseals the jar, whispers, she made it herself. You nod. Outside, the roses sway, the garden's air thickens again, and somewhere, you feel her presence not in the flowers or oil, but in the choice to make beauty a weapon. Cleopatra didn't wear roses. She used them as mask, as myth, as mirror. You step back into the sunlight. The breeze shifts, and you could swear the vines smile. You walk without direction now, past familiar paths, emptied shrines, and shadowed garden walls, past stone arches that once held garlands, and perfume stalls where laughter used to curl through the air like incense. The scent of roses lingers, but just barely, like a final note in the song everyone's forgotten how to sing. You find yourself in Memphis, not the one buzzing with merchants and riverboats, the old Memphis, where the roads are sand-drowned and the silence is thick with memory, where petals no longer fall from garlands, but from carvings, painted ones on tomb walls, on ceiling beams, on cracked ceramic. You pass a toppled column etched with a single rose in full bloom. No text, just the flower, a quiet gesture from a long-dead artist who thought, this should be remembered. You walk on, past broken amphorae once filled with oil, now crusted with time, past gardens turned to dust, where the roots once knew warmth, worship, and song. You crouch beside one rosebush growing defiantly through the cracks of a sunken courtyard. It's wild, half-starved, untamed, and it's blooming. A single flower, small, but real. You pluck it, gently, respectfully, and feel the weight of centuries pass through your fingers. You carry it into the temple ruins, past a columnless portico where no priests remain. Inside, a chamber with scorched walls and a ceiling open to the sky. Sunlight pours in like it, too, remembers. And there at the center is a niche in the wall, empty. forgotten. You place the rose inside. No oil, no garland, no offering song, just the bloom and the silence. You sit beside it. The wind moves through the cracks, carrying faint scents of distant gardens and smoke. A whisper, a rustle. The world seems to pause. Historians still argue whether the rose was ever native to Egypt or whether it came, like so many things, by boat and by chance, loved into permanence by people who needed its softness in a world of stone. They argue whether it was sacred or merely beautiful, whether it mattered. You think it does? Because here you are, thousands of years later, still listening, still breathing in what the flowers tried to say. The sun shifts. You lie back, the rose above you in its niche, and you let go. The petals close overhead, like curtains, like memory, like sleep. Let it fade now. Let the torches go out in the courtyards, one by one. Let the garlands droop on temple gates, the perfume jars empty, the scrolls roll shut. Let the footsteps of the gardeners vanish into the dust behind them. Let even the riverside chants soften, sink, and dissolve beneath the weight of rose-scented time. You are no longer in Memphis, no longer in Thebes. You are somewhere deeper, a little slower, a little safer. The air smells faintly of everything you've seen, stone warmed by morning sun, honey soaked in petals, reed baskets left under the stars, a memory of silk pressed to the skin. It smells like a flower you forgot to name but couldn't forget. You feel it settling now, your breath, your body, the heavy stillness behind your eyes. The stories are over, but the scent remains, like a gentle reminder tucked into a fold of linen, or a petal caught between the pages of a life you once walked through barefoot. So rest now. Let the wind carry you. Let the Nile run backward, or not at all. Let the gods fall silent and the scribes sleep in their corners, ink drying on their brushes. You've bloomed. You've withered. You've remembered. And the last rose, it's still blooming, in the dark, just for you.